Hey there. Tonight, we're not stepping into grand castles or royal courts. Instead, we're stepping back in time, to a place at the edge of history. A place where the stories are quieter. The ones that never made it into the paintings or history books. We're talking about the medieval peasants, the ones who never wore crowns or rode horses. The ones who endured endless struggles, plagues, hunger, cold, and the countless small indignities that came with life. All without a title, a legacy, or any of the glory that most stories are built around. Just long days, short nights, and a quiet, steady strength that most of us today would struggle to even imagine. If this slower, quieter kind of history helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it brings you peace. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's strangely comforting to know who else is out there, sharing this quiet moment with the same story. So, dim the lights, let the hum of a fan fill the background, and settle in. Let's begin at the very edge of the map, in a village that's forgotten by time. This village doesn't have a name. If it ever did, it's lost to the years. It's tucked away in a soft valley, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. A place that doesn't show up on maps, not that you've ever seen one. The trees are the edge of the world, where it all ends. The forest is thick, old, slow-moving, like something ancient that barely tolerates your presence. The fields stretch out in uneven patches of green and brown, worked until you can't tell where the earth ends and your body begins. In the distance, far north, there's a river. You've never seen it, but you've heard it spoken of, always in the same breath as dragons or saints. This is where you were born, and where you'll die. Maybe only 60 steps from one to the other. The homes here are rough. They slouch as though the wind has been pushing against them for centuries. The walls are lee and daub, mud, straw, and sticks, pieced together and patched over and over again. Roofs are thatched and sag under the weight of the seasons, always leaking in places that are too high for you to reach. The village smells like wet wool, smoke, earth, with a sour hint of livestock and a trace of damp rot. None of it surprises you anymore. It's just the smell of life here. The road to the village isn't really a road. It's just a muddy track where the ox carts have left deep grooves that fill with rainwater and mosquitoes. No one important has traveled it in years, maybe never. Days pass in a quiet hum, the only sound a distant bell marking the hours from a chapel in another village, if the wind carries it. Otherwise, you measure time by the sun's position, or the ache in your back before noon. There are only about a dozen families here, just enough to fill a small gathering on feast days. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows everyone's problems, but everyone politely ignores them, until it's time not to. The village elder, if you can call him that, is a man named Tom. He once spoke to a monk, and now he repeats that conversation as proof of his wisdom. No one questions it. Tom's hut hasn't collapsed, and his goat seems healthy. That's about as close to leadership as anyone needs here. Nothing is precise. No written records, no deeds. Boundaries are marked by an old elm, or where the ground turns soft. If there's a dispute, it's settled with a shrug, a quick argument, and sometimes a loaf of bread passed back and forth until no one wants to fight anymore. There's no school, no tavern, no inn. If a stranger comes through, it's a matter of discussion for weeks. Where did they come from? What do they want? Are they cursed? Do they smell of salt? And no one leaves. Not really. The idea of travel is more a rumor than a plan. You've heard stories of cities, towns, places where stone buildings stand taller than anything you've seen. But those are just stories. You can't miss a world you've never seen. The forest is thick, the hills are long, and the roads, if they even exist, are known for bandits and bad luck. What would you do if you even got there? You don't speak their dialect, you don't have coin, you don't know the customs. You don't even know how old you are. So you stay. It's safer this way. Even if it's hard, even if it's dull, even if the roof leaks and the well runs low, and the same stew has been bubbling for 3 days. There's comfort in routine. You know where the firewood is. You know who to ask when the fence collapses. You know which patch of sky tells you it's time to bring in the sheep. You wake with the light, and you sleep when it fades. You work in between. It isn't much, but it's life. And somehow, in that quiet rhythm, there's a kind of peace. A peace that doesn't ask questions. A peace that doesn't need to understand anything more than what's visible from the top of the nearest hill. You'll hear of wars or kings dying, or comets that scare a village 5 days away. But news never really reaches you here. It's like a game of telephone. Stories pass through so many mouths that they lose their weight. Even time feels different. Seasons don't shift neatly. They bleed into each other. A damp spring turns into a wet summer. A hard frost turns into a winter that bites through your boots. You don't count the years. You count the harvests. Dry ones, wet ones. The bad one, when the rye grew black with rot. The good one, when the barley grew thick and heavy, and even old Marjorie smiled for a week. Marjorie's steward comes around now and then, collecting grain, asking questions. You answer carefully, never too much detail. He doesn't seem to like detail. You've never met the king, but you know his name. You say it when you pray, just in case it matters. Because here, at the edge of the map, most things don't change. And when they do, it's usually for the worse. The roof mostly holds. The cottage is warm enough. Tomorrow, the same sun will rise over the same hills. And for now, that's enough. In your lifetime, you'll walk hundreds of miles, but almost all of them will be in circles. Most peasants never traveled more than a few miles from where they were born. Not because they didn't want to, but because the world beyond the next hill didn't belong to them. The thought of going to find it, it felt as far-fetched as flying. You know the names of every patch of land between your home and the edge of the field. You know the shape of every tree stump on the path to the well. You can tell who's walked the road by the depth of their footprints in the mud. Everything beyond that feels like a story. It might only be 5 miles to the next village, but it may as well be a foreign country. Travel is dangerous. Not in the thrilling, adventurous way you might imagine, but in the quiet, exhausting, and potentially deadly way. Roads aren't neat, well-cut paths. They're muddy tracks cutting through forests, fields, and stretches of empty land. There are no maps. There are no signs. Just vague directions like, go until you see the leaning pine tree, then turn left at the stone that looks like a sleeping pig. And even if you do manage to follow these directions, there's always something to worry about. First, there's the forest. Medieval forests weren't parks. They weren't romantic. They were dark, tangled, full of noises you couldn't identify. Bears. Wolves. People who didn't want to be found. If you weren't born into the woods, they didn't want you there. Then, there are the bandits. People with nothing to lose, no land to till. Travelers are vulnerable, especially if they look even slightly well-fed. A man walking with purpose might be assumed to have coin. A woman traveling alone might have something worth stealing. Confidence isn't armor. It's just an invitation. Getting lost is another fear. If you wander off track, there's no one coming to find you. You could walk for days without seeing another soul. The forest is endless, and you can disappear into the bracken, just another shadow on the wind. No one will know you're missing until the next feast day, when someone might ask, "Have you seen John?" "Oh, no?" "Well, I guess he's gone beyond the trees." And even if you did reach another village, what then? You don't speak their dialect. You don't know their customs. You don't have coins. You don't even know how old you are. In other villages, you might be met with suspicion. A stranger brings problems, disease, crime, strange ideas. Food is scarce. Beds are full. The safest place is home. Not because it's safe, but because it's familiar. Home is comfort. Even when the roof leaks. Even when the well runs low. Even when the same stew has been bubbling in the pot for 3 days. It's the comfort of knowing where the firewood is, of knowing who to ask when your fence collapses, of knowing which patch of sky tells you it's time to bring in the sheep. You wake with the light. You sleep when the light fades. You work in between. It isn't much, but it's life. And in the quiet rhythm of it all, there's a kind of peace. Peace that doesn't ask questions. Peace that doesn't need anything beyond what's visible from the top of the nearest hill. Once in a while, you hear about a war, or a king dying, or a comet that scared a village 5 days away. But the news doesn't travel fast here. It loses its weight somewhere between the merchant and the shepherd's cousin. Even time feels different. Seasons don't change neatly here. They blur together. A damp spring turns into a wet summer. A hard frost turns into a bitter winter. You don't measure the years. You measure the harvests. Dry ones? Wet ones. The bad one, when the rye turned black with rot. The good one, when the barley grew thick and heavy. Even old Marjorie smiled for a week. There's a man who comes around, the steward. He collects grain, asks questions, writes things down. You answer him carefully, never with too much detail. He doesn't like detail. You've never met the king. You know his name. You say it when you pray, just in case it matters. Because here, where the map ends, most things don't change. And when they do, it's usually for the worse. The roof mostly holds. The cottage is warm enough. Tomorrow, the same sun will rise over the same hills. And for now, that's enough. In your lifetime, you'll walk hundreds of miles. But almost all of them will be in circles. The world outside the village, the next town over, might be only 5 miles away, but it feels as distant as the moon. You've heard stories about those places, cities, with stone buildings, markets, spices. But they feel more like stories than real places. You can't miss a world you've never seen. You know every tree stump on the path to the well. You know every patch of land in the field. Everything beyond that feels like theory, something you can't touch. The next village might be only a few miles away, but it could be a foreign country. And travel is dangerous. Not in the sense of adventure, but in the quiet, exhausting, possibly fatal way. Roads aren't well-kept paths lined with signs and inns. They're muddy tracks cutting through forests, fields, and stretches of empty land. No maps. No directions. Just vague advice like, go until you see the leaning pine tree, then turn left at the stone that looks like a sleeping pig. Even if you follow those directions, there's always something to worry about. First, there's the forest. It's not a park, it's a wild, dark, ancient thing. It's full of creatures and people who don't want to be found. If you weren't born in the woods don't want you there. Then, there's the threat of bandits. Bandits with nothing to lose. If you look well-fed or have a purpose, you're a target. Traveling without protection is dangerous. Getting lost is the next fear. If you wander off course, no one's coming to find you. You could walk for days without seeing another soul. The world beyond your village could swallow you whole. And even if you make it to another village, it doesn't matter. You don't speak their dialect, you don't know their ways. You're an outsider. What's the point of seeing the world when it doesn't speak your language? The idea of leaving is a rumor. You've heard of places where people live in stone houses and eat meals you can't imagine. But you can't miss what you've never seen. The trees, the hills, the mud roads, these are the only things that are real to you. And in their quiet rhythm, you find a strange peace. Even the thought of leaving fades with time. There's comfort in the routine. There's security in knowing where the firewood is, where to fix a fence, when to bring in the sheep. You wake with the light and sleep when it fades. You live in the space between, and somehow, in that simplicity, you find a kind of peace. Tomorrow will look a lot like today. The same sun will rise, the same work will await you. But for now, that's enough. You don't need much more. Every day is the same, and yet, in some strange way, it never gets old. You wake with the sun. You work in the fields, care for the animals, mend the fences. You do what needs doing, over and over again. And as the day fades, you turn in. The rhythm is constant, the work never-ending, but there's a quiet comfort in knowing what's next. There's peace in the certainty of the routine, even if that routine is hard and repetitive. The village isn't a place of excitement or grandeur. There are no grand celebrations, no moments of great glory. Most days pass without fanfare. You don't need much. You have the basics: shelter, food, work, family. What more could you ask for? The days are long, the nights are quiet, and there's a simple beauty in the sameness of it all. You don't question the things that everyone else seems to accept. The roof leaks. The firewood runs low. But these things aren't failures. They're just part of life. You do what you can to patch things up to get by. And as long as the sun rises the next day, and the animals are fed, that's enough. There's peace in simplicity. Peace in doing what needs to be done. Then comes the steward. The man who comes to collect. He's not a lord, but he works for him. He's the one who keeps track of who owes what, who's done their part, who hasn't. You know he's coming, and when he does, you answer his questions carefully. You try not to give too much away. He doesn't like detail. He just wants to make sure everything adds up. You've never met the Lord, but you know his name. You say it when you pray, just in case it matters. The Lord doesn't care much about the villagers. He lives up the hill in a house that's slightly less crooked than yours. He eats better, sleeps better, and his roof doesn't leak. But the land he owns, that belongs to you. In a way, you belong to it. The Lord's lands are where you live and where you work. But no matter how much you work, no matter how much you give, you never own any of it. The system works, not because it's fair, but because it's stable. It's a system that has been in place for so long that it doesn't need to be explained. You owe labor. You owe taxes. You owe the church. You owe your Lord. You owe the rhythm of the seasons and the soil that keeps you grounded. There's no escape from it. No matter how much you want something more, this is your life. But you make do. You find cracks in the walls and patch them up. You've learned the art of survival. Not just surviving a day or a week, but surviving year after year. The small rebellions you can afford are the ones that keep you going. A bit of grain tucked away, an extra sack of rye buried in the earth. These little acts of resistance keep you alive. Keep you breathing. Keep you moving forward. And then there's the church. It's not just a building. It's not just a place where you go to pray. It's everywhere. The church defines your life in ways you don't even realize. It tells you when to fast, when to feast. It tells you what you can eat, and what you can't. It organizes your year. Lent. Advent. Epiphany. You don't count time by months, you count it by the church's calendar. The priest is the only one who can read. He's the one who knows what the saints have to say about your crops, your animals, your family. He's the one who can give you a blessing, or tell you which saint to pray to when things go wrong. He is both your comfort and your burden. You don't question the priest. You don't question the church. You simply follow. Because if you don't, there's nothing left. The food you eat is simple. There's no feast. There's no grand banquet. Every meal is the same, a bit of pottage, that eternal stew that never truly ends. It's never new, never gone. Just a bit of barley, cabbage, leeks, maybe some legumes. On a good day, some garlic or onions. And if you're lucky, a scrap of salted pork. But most days, it's just the bone. The bone that you boil for days, hoping it will remind you of what meat once tasted like. There's no spice. No flavor. Just earthy, gray taste that's more about survival than enjoyment. You eat it because it's what you have. A warm meal at the end of the day is a victory. Not a victory you celebrate, but one you quietly acknowledge. It's enough. Bread is the other constant. Not soft and golden, but hard, dense, dark. Made from rye or barley, maybe oats if you're lucky. Wheat is for the wealthy. You're lucky if your bread doesn't crumble to dust by the end of the day. But it fills your stomach. It soaks up the stew. And if you leave it out for a day, it might just double as a weapon. But at least it's something. Protein is rare. The animals you have, chickens, cows, don't get eaten unless there's no other choice. When you do slaughter them, you use everything. Every part. The meat. The fat. The organs. The bones. Nothing is wasted. Pork is the most common meat, but it's only used when necessary. A whole pig means weeks of work, salting, boiling, storing. Fishing, if you live near water, is an option, but even that has its restrictions. many rivers and lakes are controlled by lords, and fishing without permission is a crime. When you do fish, it's for small river fish, eels, or salted herring, if you can get it. The church plays its part. On Fridays, meat is forbidden. During Lent, you must fast. When you can't eat meat, you eat fish. Sometimes you eat nothing at all. And you do this not because you enjoy it, but because it's expected. The church tells you when you can feast and when you can't. It tells you when to fast and when to give. It tells you how to live, how to pray, how to survive. There's no sugar. Honey, if you're lucky, is the only sweetener you'll get. But honey doesn't grow on trees. And herbs are used for more than flavor. Parsley, sage, dill, mint. They're medicine. They're tradition. They keep you healthy, or at least they help you feel like you're doing something. Because sometimes doing something is all you can do. Meals are shared. There's no fine china, no silver forks. Just a table, a bench, maybe a stool, and a chest if someone in your family was good at carving. You eat together. There are no courses. No variety. Just the pot, the bread, the stew. You don't complain. Complaining doesn't make the stew thicker. You don't wish for something else. You take what you can get. Feasts are rare. If there's a wedding or a harvest festival, you might roast a bird. But the pie? The medieval pie isn't the flaky kind. It's a box, hard dough, holding a meaty filling. And it's usually spiced, if you're lucky. But most days aren't feast days. Most days are quiet. You eat what's there, and you eat what's left. You don't own much. A patch of land. A few tools. A couple of animals. A crooked house that you built yourself, but none of it is truly yours. It all belongs to the Lord. Not some distant king, not some mythical figure, but your local landholder. The one who lives up the hill in a house that's slightly less crooked than yours. He owns everything. The land, the animals, the village. And in a way, he owns you. You are a villain, not an insult, but a status. You work the land, but you don't own it. You're tied to it. You can't leave without permission. You can't pass it on freely. You owe labor, goods, and respect. You're not a slave, but you're not truly free either. Your relationship with the Lord isn't one of conversation. It's one of obligation. You don't talk to him. You talk to the steward, the man who manages his lands and makes sure everyone fulfills their duties. And you owe a lot. Labor is the first thing you owe. A few days a week, sometimes more during harvest, you're expected to work the Lord's fields instead of your own. This is called corvée labor. You get nothing for it. No payment. No thanks. Just the knowledge that someone else is eating a meal because of your work. You also owe taxes. And they come in many forms: a share of your grain, some wool, a chicken here, some eggs there. If you brew ale, you owe a share. If you have a pig, you owe bacon. If you catch fish, guess who owns the river? Taxes aren't just limited to food. If you use the mill, you pay a fee, even though it's the only way to grind your grain. You can't grind it by hand. Doing that is illegal, punishable by fines or worse. Because the Lord doesn't just want his share. He wants control. The mill, the oven, the taxes, they all serve the same purpose: control. And there are more fees. Want to get married? Pay a fee. Want to inherit your father's plot of land? There's a fee. Want to leave the village? First, ask permission. Then pay a fee. Your livestock is taxed. Your tools are taxed. Your ability to breed without permission is barely untaxed. And what do you get in return? Protection. The Lord's men at arms might protect you if bandits attack or if a rival noble invades. If famine strikes, the Lord might distribute grain, though rarely for free. If you have a legal dispute, say your neighbor's goat wandered into your garden, the Lord's court might settle it. But it's not free. This is feudalism. A system built on obligation and hierarchy, wrapped in the language of loyalty and protection. In practice, it's a system of ownership. The land belongs to the Lord. The peasants work it. The manor stands apart from the village. It's bigger. It's made of stone or timber. The roof is thick. Inside, there are tapestries, tables, servants. The Lord eats meals you can't imagine. He doesn't know your name. He only knows your numbers. How much barley you owe. How many eggs you promised. Whether your son has reached the age when he can be added to the labor rolls. Everything is recorded, not by you, of course, but by the steward, the reeve, the bailiff. These men come around with their wax tablets and parchment, asking questions you've learned to answer carefully. And if you don't meet your obligations, there are punishments. Fines. More goods taken. More days of labor. In extreme cases, your tools can be confiscated. Your land reclaimed. Your house, your goats, your dignity, all gone. Resistance isn't an option. It's foolishness. You don't resist. You comply. You survive. And you learn to find small rebellions. A pig kept off the ledger. An extra sack of rye buried deep in the earth. A bribe in eggs, rather than coin. You make do. You bend, but you don't break. And here's the strange part, it works. Not because it's fair, but because it's stable. The system is predictable. You know what you owe. You know what's expected. It's harsh, yes, but it's steady. You understand the rhythm of it. And sometimes, just sometimes, the Lord gives something back. A feast day, where food is distributed. A holiday, where labor is waived. A kind word spoken from horseback. Not enough to balance the scales, but enough to keep things from tipping. The village is small, and life is quiet. The smell of stew fills the air. The walls creak with age. The roof leaks, but it holds. The fire burns, and the animals shift in their sleep. There's no grand feast. There are no celebrations to mark the passing of time. Just the steady rhythm of work, of daily life. It's enough. Most people don't understand what it's like here. They don't know the quiet desperation of knowing that everything you own belongs to someone else. They don't know what it's like to owe everything to someone who doesn't even know your name. But you've learned to live with it. You've learned to survive. You've learned to bend without breaking. But then comes the plague. The thing everyone fears. It's not always dramatic. It doesn't always sweep through with a loud, violent roar. Sometimes it comes quietly, creeping in through the cracks. A fever. A cough. The swelling that won't go down. And it doesn't leave quickly. Once it's here, it lingers. It stays until it's done. There's no hospital. There's no cure. If you're lucky, your village has a wise woman or a healer, someone who knows which herbs to use. But mostly you stay home. You lie in bed. You sweat. You hope. You pray. Sometimes it passes. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just a cough. Other times, it's something that takes your strength, your breath, your life. There's no real understanding of why it happens. There's no word for germs. No microscopes. People have theories, old ones, confusing ones, and often wrong ones. Some say the disease comes from bad air, called miasma. The air that smells of rot and manure. Some say it's a punishment for sin. If your crops fail, it's because of your sin. If you fall ill, it's because of your wrongdoings. There are no cures, only guesses. If you have a fever, you might be bled. Or maybe leeches are used. If your stomach aches, you chew on charcoal. If you cough blood, you drink wine mixed with crushed pearls. Sometimes, someone might whisper a prayer or blow smoke over your head. And if that doesn't work, well, you wait. You wait until you can't wait anymore. You don't ask questions. You don't resist. You survive. And if you don't, then you're quietly buried, with a short prayer and a quick burial. No fanfare. No ceremony. Just the quiet passing of another soul. Famine, too, is a regular visitor. It's not something you plan for. It just happens. And when it does, you see it coming long before it arrives. It starts in the spring, when the crops don't grow right. Too much rain. Not enough. The barley comes up patchy. The beans flower and then turn brown. The wheat stays stunted. By summer, you know, it's not going to be a good year. When famine comes, you don't panic. Not yet. You just start rationing. The stew gets thinner. The bread gets smaller. The portions shrink, and everyone eats slower. You don't complain. You eat what you can. You make do. You wait for something to change, but it doesn't. And then, as it always does, the famine ends. Not suddenly, but steadily. The rains come, and the ground softens. The seeds germinate. The plants reach up weak but real. You feel the energy of hope again. You save the first harvest for others. For the children first. Then the elders. You take the smallest bowl, and you smile as you pass it to them. You remember the days when you went without. The days when the bread was smaller, when the stew was mostly water. When the first good loaf comes out of the oven, cracked on top, dark on the bottom, you stare at it before you eat. You've earned this moment. Every day you went without, every trick you used, every lie you told to spare someone else. You eat slowly, and this time, the bread fills you. Life in the village is hard. But you've learned to survive. To endure. To bend without breaking. And in that there's a quiet strength. A strength that doesn't scream for attention, but simply exists. It's there in the way you make do with what you have. In the way you share what little you can. In the way you rise each day, knowing that you've survived another night. And so you continue. Life isn't about grand triumphs or sweeping victories. It's about surviving. It's about finding meaning in the simple, repetitive acts of daily life. You wake with the light, work in the fields, tend to the animals, mend the fences. You do what needs to be done, even when you're tired, even when you're hungry. There's no room for complaining. Complaining doesn't make the stew thicker, doesn't make the roof hold any better. But there is dignity in the struggle. It's quiet. It's small. But it's there. It's in the way you make do, the way you find ways to survive, even when the world is against you. And it's this quiet resistance that sustains you. Persistence is your rebellion. When the Lord demands more, you give what you can. When the harvest fails, you find ways to make it through. You don't resist the system, you endure it. That is the only way to survive. The village is a web of connections. You don't have many possessions, but you have something far more important: community. Everyone knows everyone else's business. You know whose child is sick, whose cow is giving less milk, who hasn't been able to pay their taxes. You also know who can lend you a hand when your fence falls down, who has a bit of extra grain when the harvest was poor, and who might be willing to trade some herbs for a bit of wool. The relationships are simple. They're based on need. The kind of need that everyone shares. You help when you can, and you take help when you need it. There's no pride in asking for assistance. No shame in offering it. If someone is in need, you step up. Not because you're noble, but because you're part of a community, a place where everyone relies on everyone else to survive. And the church? It's more than just a place of worship. It's the heartbeat of the village. The priest is the only one who can read, the one who offers guidance when everything else feels out of reach. He is the keeper of your spiritual survival. His words are the only comfort when the world seems overwhelming, when the famine is deepening and the sickness is spreading. He gives structure to the chaos. He tells you when to fast and when to feast, when to pray and when to rest. But the church is also an instrument of control. The priest collects the tithe, 1/10 of everything you produce. Grain, eggs, wool, chickens, whatever you have, it's his. If you can't pay in cash, you pay in labor. It's a system that keeps you tethered. And if you're lucky, you get a blessing, a prayer to keep the sickness at bay. If you're unlucky, you get silence. The church isn't just a building, it's the structure that defines your world. It tells you what's good and what's bad, what's holy and what's not. The priest might not know your name, but he knows your sins. He knows your obligations. And when you die, he's the one who will bless your body and send your soul off into the next world. Then comes sickness again. It's part of life. It's always lurking, waiting to strike. Sometimes it's a fever that takes you down slowly, a cough that won't go away. Other times, it's something more sudden, something that steals the breath from your lungs. And when it comes, you stay home. You lie in bed. You sweat. You pray. You hope for the best, but the truth is, you don't know if you'll survive. There are no hospitals. There are no doctors. There are no magic cures. All you have are the herbs the wise woman gave you and the prayers whispered over your bed. And when it's bad enough, you call the priest. He'll come with his oil and his prayers. He'll offer what comfort he can, but in the end, it's up to you. Whether you survive or not. And yet, somehow, life goes on. The sickness eventually passes. The harvest eventually comes. The village survives. Not because it's easy, not because it's fair, but because it endures. You don't know when the next plague will come, or when the next famine will strike, but you know one thing, you'll survive. There's no grand revolution here. No sweeping change. The system that binds you will always be there, but so will the quiet rebellion. The small victories. The choices you make to survive another day. Because, in the end, that's all you can do. Keep going. Keep working. Keep breathing. And when you die, it's the end of your story, but not the end of your village. The priest will say a prayer. The bell might ring. Your family will bury you in the churchyard. Your name might be forgotten, but the rhythm of the seasons, the rhythm of life, will continue. The villagers will continue to plant, to harvest, to work. They will continue to survive. And when the next famine comes, they'll eat the last bit of bread, they'll boil the last of the roots, and they'll wait for the rain. And when the rain comes, they'll smile again. They'll know that, despite everything, despite the hardship, despite the struggle, they've survived. This is the quiet strength of the medieval peasant. It's not the strength of the warrior, or the king, or the hero. It's the strength of someone who knows that survival, day after day, is the only victory that matters. It's the strength of someone who lives with persistence, because persistence is the only rebellion that's left. And so they endure in the plowing of fields, in the smoke rising from cottages at dusk, in the lullabies sung beside dying fires. In the whisper of old stories passed down through the generations. The peasants don't need monuments or songs written in their names. They endure in the quiet rhythms of their lives. They endure because, in the end, endurance is its own kind of resistance. Without them, there would be no harvests, no cathedrals, no armies to march under banners. They built the world, even as they were kept from owning it. And they outlasted the lords. They outlasted the kings. And in their quiet endurance, they created a kind of revolution, not through rebellion, but through survival.